These 7 Pacific Northwest horror stories take place in the deep woods and quiet backroads of the region, with each experience coming from first-hand reports and local anecdotes. If you enjoy the video, consider liking and subscribing and hitting the bell notification, and I'd love to know where you are watching from. Now let's begin. I've always done solo trips. For me, that's the whole point. I needed a break. Just needed to not be in the city, not be around people, not be on a clock. I loaded up my car and headed out to one of the big national forests in northern Oregon. It was early fall, so the main season was over. I found a state-run campground, one of those ones with just a gravel loop, a picnic table, and a fire pit at each site. No electricity, no running water besides a single hand pump near the entrance. It was perfect. There were maybe 5 other sites taken in the whole loop. I picked a spot at the far end, number 22, right against the thick woods. I figured, more privacy. I got my tent set up, got my chair unfolded, and was just sitting there, enjoying the quiet. After about an hour, this older guy shuffles over from a few sites down. He looked weathered. Plaid shirt, greasy jeans, thin white hair. He just sort of appeared at the edge of my gravel pad. "Just getting in?" he asks. His voice was a little gravelly. I said yeah, just setting up. He introduced himself, said his name was Dale. He pointed back up the loop. "I'm in 20, just me and the trees." He had a weird, forced little chuckle. We made small talk for a minute. He seemed fine. A little lonely, maybe. The kind of guy you run into at every campground who just wants to chat. He eventually said, "Well, I'll let you get to it," and shuffled off. I didn't think anything of it. I got my fire going. I started prepping dinner, just some sausages on a stick. As it was starting to get dark, he was back. I heard the crunch of gravel and looked up. He was standing there again, this time holding a single, tall can of cheap beer. "Smells good," he said. He wasn't really looking at the fire. He was looking at my gear, my cooler, my car. "Just dinner," I said. He held out the beer. "Figured you might want one. I got plenty." I thanked him and took it, just to be polite. I didn't really want it. I set it on the table. "You're all alone out here, huh?" he said. He didn't sit. He just stood there at the edge of the light. "Yeah, just for a couple nights. Need to clear my head." "Brave," he said. "I wouldn't do it. Not alone. Gets awful dark out here." He just stood there while I tried to eat. It was getting really uncomfortable. I'm holding a sausage on a stick, trying to cook it, and this guy is just watching me. I finally said, "Well, I'm pretty beat. Probably going to turn in early." Right, he said. He lingered for another 10 seconds, just staring, then said, "Night then," and he walked back toward his site. I watched him go. I didn't see a truck at his site, but I did see a small, dingy-looking canvas tent. It got dark. That deep, cold, forest dark. I cleaned up, put all my food and my cooler in the car like you're supposed to. I left my little camp axe on the picnic table, next to my water jug. I got into my tent, zipped everything up, and started reading with a headlamp. I fell asleep probably around 10. I woke up. I don't know what woke me. It was that dead quiet. The kind of silence that feels heavy. I looked at my watch. 3:15 in the morning, and I had to use the restroom. Badly. I laid there for a minute trying to convince myself I didn't, but I did. I sighed, grabbed my big flashlight from the tent pocket, and started to unzip the tent fly. I was moving slow, trying to be quiet. I unzipped it just enough to stick my head out. The moon was almost full, so it wasn't pitch black. I could see the shape of the picnic table, the fire pit, my car. I was just about to crawl out, and I froze. He was there, Dale. He was standing right in the middle of my campsite. Not by the fire, not by the table, just in the open dirt, halfway between my tent and my car. He wasn't facing me. He was facing my car, just standing there, perfectly still, staring at it. My heart just stopped. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I was just halfway out of my tent, staring at this man's back. I watched him for at least 30 seconds. He didn't move a muscle. My voice came out all wrong, a squeaky whisper. "Dale, can I help you?" He turned. So fast. It wasn't a shuffle. He just spun on his heel, all in one motion, and he was holding my camp axe, the one I knew I had left on the picnic table. I didn't move. He didn't move. He was maybe 15 feet away. I could see his face in the moonlight. He wasn't smiling. He was blank. Just nothing. I said, That's my axe." He looked down at the axe in his hand, like he was just now realizing it was there. Then he looked back up at me. His voice was flat. "It's sharp." My blood went cold. "You keep your tools sharp," he said. "That's good. Important." He took one step toward my tent. That's all it took. I scrambled back inside, pulling the zipper so hard I thought it was going to break. I was fumbling in the dark. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't grab anything. I was yelling, "Just get out of here! Get away from my tent! Get away!" I heard a sound. A single, quiet, sound, like a little laugh. I was crawling over my sleeping bag, trying to find my car keys. My brain was just screaming car alarm. I found the lump in my jeans pocket, dug them out, and hit the panic button. The honk of the horn and the flash of the headlights just exploded into the night. It was so loud. The whole campsite lit up in these strobing, white flashes. I was on my knees, looking out the mesh window of the tent. He was gone. He wasn't there. I could see the whole campsite, the picnic table, the fire pit, the patch of dirt. He was just gone, but the axe was there. It was on the ground, right in the dirt where he had been standing. The alarm was blaring. I could hear someone in another loop yell, "Hey, what's going on?" I heard a car door slam somewhere else. I left the alarm on for maybe 30 seconds, just blaring. Then I clicked it off, and the silence that came back was worse. I didn't go to the restroom. I didn't sleep. I just sat in my sleeping bag, with my biggest folding knife in my hand, staring at the tent door. I listened. I heard every single twig snap, every owl, but I didn't hear him. I just sat there, rigid, until the sky started to turn from black to that awful, sick gray. The second it was light enough to see, I got out of the tent. My legs were shaky. The axe was still there on the ground. I looked over towards Site 20. It was empty. I don't mean he packed up. I mean it was empty. The dingy canvas tent was gone. There was no truck. There was no trash. The fire pit was cold and clean. It looked like no one had been there at all. I didn't pack. I just started grabbing my things. I threw my sleeping bag, still unrolled, into the back of my car. I threw the tent in without folding it. I grabbed my cooler. I left the axe. I left the camp chair. I left the beer he gave me sitting on the table. I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove. I had to pass the camp host's little RV on the way out. There was a sign-in sheet on a clipboard by the door. I stopped. I don't know why. I just had to look. I got out and looked at the sheet. I saw my name for Site 22. I saw the people in Site 8, The family in 12. Site 20 was blank. There was no name. It hadn't been checked out. I got back in my car and drove until I hit the main highway, and I didn't stop until I was back in Portland. My boyfriend, Ben, was always the one looking for the spots that weren't on the maps. He spent way too much time on those old hiking forums, the ones from the early 2000s that barely even work anymore, looking for what he called unofficial spots. He found a pin for this place in the Central Cascades, over in Washington. It wasn't a main trail, not really. It was an old, gated-off Forest Service road that you had to walk up for a few miles, and then, according to this forum post from 12 years ago, you had to find a specific dry creek bed and follow a ridge. The post promised this incredible, hidden view of the main peak, one you couldn't get from anywhere else. We went on a Tuesday in late summer. It was one of those classic Pacific Northwest days where it's not raining, but it feels like it could at any second. The air was heavy and damp, and everything was this deep, saturated green. We parked by the metal gate. The only car there. The walk up the service road was fine. A little boring. It was just gravel and moss, with the trees really thick on either side. It was quiet. You know, that deep woods quiet where you can hear your own blood pumping and every step you take sounds way too loud. We didn't see a single other person. After maybe an hour, we found it. The dry creek bed. It was exactly where the post said it would be. We looked at each other, kind of excited, and pushed through some big ferns to leave the road. The path on the other side was barely a path. It was a game trail, maybe. We were just pushing through shoulder-high foliage, following the ridge. Ben was in front. After about 20 minutes of this, the air got really still. The smell changed. It wasn't just damp earth anymore. It was sour, like old garbage that's been rained on for weeks, and something metallic underneath it, like old pennies. Ben stopped so fast I walked right into him. "You smell that?" he whispered. I just nodded. He pointed. "Look." We were in a small clearing. It was small, maybe 30 feet across, and it was obviously man-made. Someone had dragged fallen logs and huge branches into a sort of shelter. It wasn't a clean lean-to. It was a mess, more like a den, with a huge, filthy blue plastic tarp sagging over the top of it, but it was the stuff around it. On one side, laid out on a long, mossy log, were boots. Just boots. Maybe 20 pairs of them. There were little kids' rain boots, big heavy work boots, women's hiking boots, all mismatched, all rotting. They were just lined up in a row. On the other side of the clearing, someone had taken strips of brightly colored cloth, reds and yellows. They were tied to every single low branch on the surrounding trees, hundreds of them. They looked like little warning flags, just hanging there, completely still. And then there were the tin cans. They were hanging from strings, all over the place. Some were full of what looked like pebbles. They weren't making noise. They were just there. Ben whispered, "This is not right." He pointed near the entrance of the blue tarp den. There was a small, rusted folding chair, a little kid's chair. Sitting on it was a doll, one of those old porcelain ones, but its face was smashed in. I didn't even think. I just said, "Ben, we have to go. Now." I didn't yell. My voice came out flat. I grabbed the back of his shirt. He nodded, his eyes wide. We turned, very slowly, and started walking back the way we came. We tried to be quiet, stepping carefully. We got maybe 50 yards, back into the thick ferns. A massive crash came from the clearing we just left. It wasn't a branch falling. It sounded like someone picked up a huge log and threw it. We both froze. Ben whispered, "Run." We started running. We were thrashing through the ferns, not caring about the noise, just trying to get back to the creek bed. And the sound was right there with us. It wasn't behind us. It was to our right, in the thick trees, just off the ridge. It was matching us, step for step. It was loud. Whatever it was big, and it was not trying to hide. We'd speed up, it would speed up. We'd slow down to scramble over a fallen tree, and we'd hear it stop, wait, and then start again the second we did. It was keeping perfect pace. I tripped. I went down hard, right onto my hands and knees on the wet ground. Ben grabbed me, pulling me up. "Go! Go!" he yelled, and for those 2 seconds, we were still. And it was still. We could hear it breathing. It was so close, maybe 20 feet into the trees. It was a heavy, ragged, wet sound, like a person who had just sprinted, but guttural. We couldn't see anything, just dark timber and ferns. We didn't wait. We just scrambled. We burst out of the game trail and half fell, half slid down the little embankment into the dry creek bed. We were back on the main service road. We stood there, gasping for air. My knees were bleeding and covered in mud. We looked back. We couldn't hear the breathing anymore. It stopped, across the creek bed, up on the ridge we'd just come from. He was just there, standing partially behind a huge fir tree. A man. He wasn't wearing rags. He was wearing old, stained flannel and dark pants, but he was covered in dirt, just filthy. His hair was long and matted. He was about 30 yards away. He wasn't holding anything. He wasn't yelling. He was just standing there, perfectly still. He was watching us. His face had no expression, no anger, no nothing. Just observation. Then he raised one hand, very slowly, and he just pointed at me. I didn't scream. I just grabbed Ben's arm. We turned. We started walking. We did not run. It felt like if we ran, he would run. We just walked, very, very fast, back down the Forest Service road. We kept looking back over our shoulders. He didn't follow. He just stayed there, by that tree, watching us. We walked like that for 45 minutes, until we rounded the last bend and saw our car by the gate. We got in. Ben's hands were shaking so bad he could barely get the key in the ignition. He locked the doors. He started the engine, and we just drove. We didn't say a word until we were back on the main highway with other cars around us. This was supposed to be an easy one. My roommate, Sarah, and her boyfriend had been wanting to do this hike for a while. It's one of those super popular ones in Washington. The kind you see all over Instagram. The ones that lead to a big, dramatic waterfall. It's a wide, well-maintained trail, and on a Saturday in July, it was packed. We were just looking for a day trip. Get out of the city, get some exercise, take a few pictures. The parking lot was almost full when we got there around 10. We saw families with little kids, people walking tiny dogs, trail runners. Just a normal, busy trailhead. The first mile or so was fine. We were just chatting, making fun of Mark for bringing a huge, military-looking backpack for a 5-mile round-trip hike. The trail was climbing, but it was gentle. We were letting people pass us. We were passing people. Just normal. We got to a switchback, maybe 2 miles in. The crowd had thinned out a bit. It was just the 3 of us in this little section of woods, and we heard it. A kid's laugh, a giggle. It was weird. It was high-pitched, like a little girl, but it wasn't coming from up the trail or down the trail. It was coming from off the trail. Down the slope, in the thick trees. Mark stopped. "You guys hear that?" "Hear what?" Sarah said. And it happened again. Sarah looked at me. "Is that a kid?" She looked worried. She looked over the edge of the trail. It was a steep drop, just dense ferns and fir trees. You couldn't see more than 20 feet in. "Hello?" she called out. Nothing. Just the sound of the wind in the trees. We stood there for a second. "That's weird," I said. "Maybe they're just playing." Mark, trying to be the tough guy, said, "Probably just some hikers letting their kid run wild." We kept walking. We went around another bend, and the sound of the waterfall was getting louder. We figured that was the end of it. Then we heard it again. Hee hee! This time, it was way too close. It sounded like it was right next to the trail, just behind a big patch of salmonberry bushes, maybe 10 feet away from us. We all stopped. I could feel the hair on my arms stand up. "Okay, that's not funny," Mark said, his voice a little shaky. He was trying to sound annoyed, but he looked spooked. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" The giggling started again, but this time it wasn't a short laugh. It just kept going. It was high, and it had this rhythmic, sing-song quality. It wasn't playful. It was mechanical. "I don't like this," Sarah whispered. She grabbed Mark's arm. "It's just a person," Mark said. But he didn't move. The giggling stopped. Dead silence. We could hear a bird somewhere. We could hear the distant waterfall. "Let's just go," I said. "Let's just get to the waterfall." With the other people, we started walking. But now we were walking fast. We were sticking close together. Nobody was talking. We were just listening. For about 5 minutes, it was fine. We passed a family coming back down. A dad, a mom, 2 little kids with ice cream cones. They were smiling. We must have looked like ghosts. We tried to smile back. As soon as they were out of sight, we heard it again. This time, it was in front of us. It was impossible. We had been walking fast. There was no way anyone could have gotten around us that quickly without us seeing them. The slope on either side of the trail was too steep, but the giggle was coming from up ahead, around the next bend. "No," Sarah said. She just stopped. I'm not going up there." Mark was trying to look brave. "Sarah, it's just a trail. It's probably an animal. A bird. They make weird sounds." "That is not a bird, Mark," I said. The giggling was getting frantic. It was loud now, and it was wrong. The sound was too big. It was a kid's laugh, but it had the volume of an adult screaming. "We have to go back," Sarah said. She was starting to cry. "No, look," Mark said, pointing. "The waterfall is right there. We can hear it. It's just around this bend. We'll be with all the other people. We're safer in a crowd. We just have to pass, whatever this is." His logic made sense. Going back meant walking past where we'd heard it the first 2 times. Going forward meant pushing past it, but getting to the big, open viewing area with dozens of other people. "Okay," I said. "Okay, let's just walk. Don't run. Just walk. Fast." Mark grabbed a big, thick stick from the side of the trail. I picked up a rock. Sarah just held on to the back of Mark's backpack. We started walking, moving as a little 3-person unit. We got to the bend. The trail turned sharply to the left. The giggling was just on the other side. It was constant now, just this high, piercing, awful sound. We rounded the corner. He was there. The trail was empty. But he was there, on the uphill side of the trail, squatting. He was half hidden behind a huge, mossy boulder. It was a man. He was clean. He was wearing dark blue jeans and a white button-down shirt. A nice shirt, like an office shirt. It was neatly pressed. His hair was short and dark, combed. He had no shoes on. His feet were pale and clean, just resting on the dark, damp earth. We stopped. We were maybe 20 feet away. He was squatting on his heels, just vibrating. He was rocking back and forth, and the sound was coming from him. His head was down. "Sir?" Mark said. His voice was a high-pitched squeak. He was holding the stick up. Are you okay?" The man stopped giggling. He stopped rocking. He slowly, very slowly lifted his head. He was smiling. It was the biggest smile I have ever seen. It was wrong. It was too wide. It pulled his entire face tight, showed all of his teeth, all the way to the back. His eyes were wide open, and he was staring right at us. He looked delighted. We just stood there. Nobody could move. He tilted his head, still smiling. "You came," he said. His voice wasn't a giggle. It was a low, normal, adult man's voice. "You found me. It's time to play." And he put his hands down on the ground like a runner. "That's what broke it," Sarah screamed. A real, high, sharp scream. We didn't think. We just turned and ran. All three of us. We ran. We were yelling, falling over each other, just sprinting back down the trail we had just come up. We ran past the spot where we'd heard him before. We just ran. We didn't hear him giggling anymore. We heard footsteps behind us, heavy footsteps. He was running too, and he was running fast. We were making so much noise. We almost knocked over a guy who was coming up the trail. He was a big guy, had a beard, hiking poles. "Whoa, whoa," he yelled. "What's wrong?" "A guy," I screamed, trying to get air. "There's a man. He's..." I couldn't explain. The hiker looked past us, up the trail. His face changed. "Hey," he yelled. "Hey, what are you doing?" We didn't stop to look. We just kept running. We heard the hiker yell something else, but we were gone. We just went. We ran the entire 2 miles back to the car. We didn't stop. We didn't look back. We burst out of the trees into the parking lot. The sun was bright. People were having picnics on their tailgates. It was normal. We fumbled with the keys, piled into Sarah's car. Mark threw his stick in the back. We locked the doors. We just sat there, gasping, crying. Mark was looking in the side mirror, just staring at the trailhead. "Did you see him?" I asked him. "No," he said. "The other hiker, he's walking back to his car. He's walking really fast. And he's not looking back." We didn't wait for him. We just started the car and got out of there. My buddy Alex and I, we're what you'd call serious backpackers. We don't do the weekend loops that are crowded by Saturday afternoon. We look at topographical maps. We find the little blue specks that don't have a trail leading to them, and that's where we go. We're good at it. We carry the gear. We have the emergency beacons. We know how to navigate. The whole point, for us, is to be where no one else is. This trip was in the Central Cascades. We found a lake on a map that was at least 8 miles, as the crow flies, from the nearest Forest Service road. To get there, you had to take a maintained trail for about 5 miles and then just cut straight up a drainage basin, over a ridge, and down into this little bowl of granite. It was a 9 or 10 mile hike, the last 4 of it being a brutal bushwhack. We went for a 4-day weekend. The hike in was exactly as hard as we expected. We were climbing over fallen logs the size of cars, pushing through thick brush. But we got there, and it was worth it. This lake was perfect, maybe half a mile across, deep, cold, and absolutely pristine. You could tell no one had been there in a long, long time. There wasn't a fire ring. There wasn't a single piece of trash. We set up our camp on a flat, mossy area about 100 yards back from the shore. We each had our own one-man tent, and we set them up about 20 feet apart. We made a small, clean fire pit, cooked dinner, and just sat there. The silence was incredible. It was so complete. There was no highway noise, no planes, just the wind and the occasional splash of a fish jumping. We went to bed feeling like we'd earned it. The first night was perfect. Dead silent. We spent the next day fishing. We were catching trout, one after another. We ate well. The vibe was just total peace. We were a million miles from everything. We talked about how we were never going to tell anyone the location of this spot. That evening, we made another small fire. We were sitting by it, just watching the flames, not really talking. The sun had set, and it was that deep, dark blue twilight. That's when we heard the first shout. It was a man's voice. It just yelled one word. "Hey!" It was loud. It sounded like it came from the other side of the lake, maybe a half-mile away. Alex and I looked at each other. Alex frowned. "Is that someone else?" I cupped my hands around my mouth and yelled back, "Hello." We waited. The silence just flooded back in. "Maybe they're lost," I said. It was the only thing that made sense. Alex yelled, "Are you okay?" We waited again, maybe 30 seconds. Then, from the same spot, just as loud, "Hey!" It was exactly the same. The same pitch, the same length. It wasn't conversational. It was just a noise. Alex looked at me, and he wasn't frowning anymore. He looked uneasy. "That's weird. Really weird," I said. Why wouldn't they answer? We sat there and listened. The fire crackled, and for a minute, I thought that was it. Then, from a different spot, way over to our right, on the ridge we'd hiked in on, "Hey!" It was closer, and this time, it sounded wrong. It was loud, but it was flat, like a recording of a person yelling, just played at full volume. Alex and I stood up at the same time. "I don't like this," Alex said. He grabbed his big mag light from his pack. I grabbed mine. "Who is out there?" I yelled. My voice was tight, and then we heard the scream. It wasn't a, "Hey," it was a woman. She screamed, a full-on, terrified, "Somebody is murdering me" scream. It was so loud it echoed off the granite walls of the bowl. It sounded like it was coming from the ridge. Same place as the last. "Hey." I felt my blood turn to ice. Alex just whispered, "Oh my God, we have to." I started. "Do we?" "What?" Alex said, his voice low. "Hike up there? In the dark?" "Kyle, what if that's a trick?" The scream didn't come again. There was no, "Help me." Just that one, awful, piercing sound. And then, silence. The woods were completely, totally quiet. Even the wind seemed to stop. "We get in the tents," Alex said. He was all business. "We zip up. We get our bear spray and our knives. And we do not make a sound. We do not go out. No matter what." I just nodded. We kicked dirt on the fire, not caring about being neat. We scrambled into our separate tents. I was shaking so bad I could barely get the zipper closed. I sat there in the dark. My heart was a drum. I could hear Alex, just breathing, in his tent 20 feet away. For an hour, there was nothing. Just the silence. I was starting to think maybe it was. I don't know what, I thought. Then I heard a voice, right outside. It was Alex. His voice, it said, "Kyle, you see that?" My hand was on my tent zipper. I was about to open it and ask him what he was doing. Then I heard a whisper from inside Alex's tent. "Kyle, don't. I'm in here." I stopped. My hand was frozen. The voice outside spoke again. It was Alex's voice. Perfect mimicry. "Kyle, come on. I need help." "Alex," I whispered toward his tent. "Is that?" "No," he whispered back. Then, from the other side of my tent, a different voice. It was my voice. I heard my own voice say, "It's okay, Alex. I'm coming." My stomach just fell. I can't explain that. Hearing your own voice when you're not speaking. Alex just made one sound. A little gasp. We were silent. The two things outside were silent. Then the sound started. It wasn't voices. It was movement. This wasn't a person. It was heavy. It was walking around our campsite. We could hear it. Just a heavy, two-footed thud, thud on the soft ground. It walked from my tent over to Alex's. I heard it breathing, a deep, huffing breath. Then it stopped, and we heard a sound I will never, ever forget. It was a crack, a sharp, loud sound, like a baseball bat hitting a pine tree. It was so loud it sounded like a gunshot. It came from right where our fire pit had been. It was an answer from across the lake. "Crack!" An answer. They were talking. There were more than one. The heavy footsteps started again. They circled our tents. Once, twice. The huffing was right against my tent wall. I was holding my knife, just staring at the nylon, expecting a hand or a claw to just rip it open. Then it just walked away. We heard the footsteps fading, heading up the ridge, back the way the scream had come from. We didn't sleep. We didn't talk. We just sat there, in our tents, 250 miles from the nearest human, for 8 more hours. When the sun came up, and the light hit the tents, I heard Alex's zipper. "Kyle, we're leaving. Right now." We didn't pack. We just grabbed the essentials. We left the tents. We left the fishing rods. We left the cookware. We just shoved our sleeping bags into our packs, grabbed our beacons, and started hiking. We didn't talk. We just hiked. We were both armed, holding bear spray in one hand and our knives in the other. We hiked that 4 miles of brutal bushwhacking in under 2 hours. We were running. We got back to the main trail. We still didn't talk. We just kept going. We got to the car. We threw the packs in the back. We got in. Alex started the engine. We just sat there for a second, in the safety of the car, at the trailhead. He turned to me. He looked gray. He just said, "We never, ever talk about this. And we never, ever come back." And we didn't. I had been out for 3 days with the 2 dogs, just the kind of slow, aimless hike that eats up time and leaves the head quiet. We walked into a wide meadow in the late afternoon and stopped because it felt like the right place to camp. There were no cars, no other people, only the flat sweep of grass and the trees like a rim around it. I set the pack down, let the dogs wander a little, and did the usual tent, water, a quick scramble for firewood. The light thinned and the dogs curled near my feet while I made dinner on a tiny stove. The first odd thing was how still the whole place got when the sun went. Not like when wind dies, but like someone had pulled a curtain across the world. The usual insect noise cut out. The dogs' ears pricked and they stared the same way, but there was nothing to see. I told myself it was just being out there alone, that wilderness thrill thing settling in, and I ate. After dark, I zipped the tent and lay there with a headlamp off because headlights in the eyes are the wrong kind of comfort. The dogs were restless, soft noises and shifting. Then I heard voices, not right at the tent but out in the trees, scattered and too close to be a distant camp. They sounded like people talking in low bursts, a couple of phrases carried on the wind and then gone. They were the kind of voices you do not expect to hear when there is no road and no sign that anyone else should be out there. I unzipped enough to look out and sweep the beam across the tree line. No lights, nothing moving, the grass flat under the moon. I stepped out because I could not sleep with that in my head. One of the dogs stayed near the tent, tail tucked. The other followed close to my legs. We moved toward where the voices seemed to come from, slow and careful, expecting to see hikers or a group with a fire. Instead, we found footprints in the wet ground at the edge of the meadow. Too many to be one person, different sizes, some shallow, some deep. They cut across the grass and vanished at the tree line. I followed the line of prints into the trees. It felt like something you do when you are already halfway past reasonable. The dogs stayed alert and quiet, not eager but not pulling back either. The prints were fresh, mud pressed dark into the soil. They trailed between trees, around a collapsed log, then stopped at a narrow creek. At the water there was nothing beyond the last mark. The tracks simply ended on the bank, as if whoever left them had stepped off the earth. I scanned the stream with the light. There were no crossings, no stones that made a natural stepping path. The bank was soft and sloped. The prints came right to the water and stopped. My first thought was someone had dragged a canoe away, or that there was a hidden path. Nothing. My second thought was the kind you try not to think, and I kept my mouth shut about it. We waited a while. The dogs did not sniff or paw at the bank like they would at an animal trail. They tilted their heads and looked down like they were puzzled. Eventually, I followed the creek downstream a little, looking for a boot print on the opposite side or a set of marks indicating a crossing. For 30 yards, there was nothing. The world opened out again into another stand of trees and then a slope up. No sign of people, only the soft sound of water and our own breathing. We went back to camp. I did not sleep much that night. The voices came again in fits, fragments drifting and cutting off, sometimes sounding like they were a quarter-mile away and sometimes like they were almost at the edge of the tent. They were never a sentence you could pin down. Once I heard laughter, quick and high, and the dogs stiffened like someone had snapped a leash. Dawn crawled in pale and thin, and I packed up in a hurry. On the ridge above the meadow where the trail cut through, I found other evidence. Someone had taken a lightweight camping chair and left it half folded in the grass, fabric stained, no sign of who might have used it. A small headlamp lay in the grass about 10 feet away. It had its batteries still in place and was not broken. There was no smoke ring on the grass, no char from a fire, and no wrappers or other gear. It looked like someone had been there briefly and then left their things standing as if they intended to return. I kept moving and did not tell anyone I passed on the trail about what I had heard or found. I felt stupid saying it out loud. The dogs stayed on edge for the rest of the day, glancing toward the trees as if expecting someone to step out. People I met later at a trailhead shrugged, offered theories about youth pranks or hunters. Maybe that was it. Maybe kids had driven in, stumbled around, left a chair, freaked out and gone, leaving the prints disrupted by water. Maybe hunters had crossed and left the tracks, but none of those explanations matched the details I had seen. The way the prints stopped at the water and the chair and headlamp were set down like someone meant to be back in a few minutes. I did not go back. The dogs stayed with me in the city for a few days, and at night they would wake and look toward the window, ears up. A week later, I read a thread where someone else wrote about hearing voices in the trees and finding nothing but prints that stopped at the river, and their post was written like a quiet admission, like something you give up because you do not know how to carry it. They signed it off without location details, and people replied with their own short, uncanny things. That is how it ended for me. I left the meadow, kept my mouth shut, and let it sit there in my head like a pebble you pick up but do not show anyone. I still wonder what it was that walked to the water and then simply stopped. We had picked a flat spot on a gravel spit beside the lake, the kind of place kids run in circles and sticks make good swords. My brother, his wife, their little boy, and I rolled in late afternoon with a cooler and 2 folding chairs. We set up tents close enough to hear each other breathe, built a small fire, and everyone was laughing about something small and useless. There were other campers down the shore, but not many, just enough to feel like the place was used without being crowded. After dark, the boy slept in the car because he always slept better there, and my sister-in-law and I sat with the fire while my brother wandered to the water to cast a line. The night was dense, not windy, and sounds carried weirdly across the lake. About an hour after the last headlamp went off, we heard voices coming from the far tree line, faint at first and then moving closer along the access road. They sounded like 3 men, talking low. My brother came back and told us he'd seen headlights far up the road, but they passed the turnoff and kept going. We shrugged it off, expecting drunk teenagers or fishermen looking for a boat ramp. Around midnight I woke because something felt wrong. The dogs in the car were restless, and the quiet outside the tents wasn't quiet the way wilderness can be. It felt held. I lay still and heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel right at the edge of our campsite. Someone moved slowly around the outer ring, stopping near the car, walking to the small cooler, then around our tent. I watched the zipper of the tent flap catch in the moonlight. Someone kicked a pebble that hit the tarp, a single small sound so deliberate it woke the whole group. My brother unzipped and stood there with a flashlight, voice steady but loud enough to cut the night. The footsteps moved away. For a while no one spoke. Then from the dark a male voice said something like, "You campers out late," but it wasn't a greeting. It sounded like a question they already knew the answer to. There were murmurs and laughter that didn't match the tone of people lost or looking for directions. We told them to leave and to keep their distance. The voice answered with a laugh and a grunt, and that was it. The footsteps kept circling, never leaving the perimeter, never coming close enough to show a face in the beam. We spent the rest of the night in shifts. 1 person awake, 1 person watching. Nobody tried to start a fight, and none of them spoke to us again. In the morning there were tire tracks near the bushes, and someone had walked through our little circle and left cigarette butts tucked into a hollow log. My brother found a length of orange rope tied to a small sapling on the outermost ring where the men had been walking. It was knotted narrow and practiced, not like a throwaway, and it sat there slack on the ground like it had been used to mark something. At breakfast, the other campers said they'd seen 3 men around the lake late, a truck parked by the far trailhead that no one recognized. One older guy told us that he'd woken at 2 a.m. and watched a pair of shadows stand on the ridge above the road pointing down at the water. Nobody had called the rangers. Nobody wanted to. We all packed slower than usual, eyes on the tree line. When we went to break camp, I noticed our fishing gear tossed unevenly, not as we had left it. The cooler was unzipped slightly, nothing missing but not sealed like we had left it. The boys' little model car was found across the way under a bush, not where we'd left it by the trunk. Whoever had been around had moved things just enough to send a message. Nothing stolen, nothing smashed, but the time and care it took to do that felt like a test, We debated leaving then. My sister-in-law wanted to stay until noon to not make a thing of it, but the boy kept asking if the men were coming back. The presence of other campers around made it feel less like we were singled out, though the parking area still had that truck gone from the night before, and no one could say who it belonged to. On the drive out, my brother turned down the radio and watched the trees. We all felt the same quiet attention from the places we passed, like the road had been watched for hours and might be again. We didn't tell anyone much. We didn't want to blow it up into a story that would make people laugh. No one called the park, and we didn't report it. Later, when I tell it to friends, it ends at the same place it ended that morning, with us folding the tents and getting back on the highway. Whatever those men were doing, they never followed us. There were no confrontations, no dramatic chase, just a long, patient circling and then silence, leaving their marks in cigarette butts, tire tracks, and a length of rope that meant more than it should have. We left the lake that day with the boy asleep in the back, and none of us slept well for the next few nights. I went out for a run that morning, thinking it would be a day I'd remember for the right reasons. I left the trailhead with a small pack, my dog at my heels, and a paper map I'd folded to fit in a pocket. I had been on longer runs before, and I knew the area well enough to not worry much about gear. It was supposed to be a loop, maybe 20 miles, the kind of distance you sleep on afterward and feel good about. The first mistake I made was trusting an old map and the idea that trails look the same years later. Parts of the route were changed by fires and fallen trees, and within a few miles what I thought was a clear junction looked like nothing I remembered. I kept going because the day felt fine, and because turning back felt like admitting I had screwed up. My dog stuck close, looking to me for the next move. By the second day, my phone was dead and the trail had split into tracks nobody had maintained. I realized I was off route, but I told myself I could reorient. I tried to find a familiar ridge, a creek I remembered crossing. The land kept folding on itself in ways that made sense only when I had a view from higher up. I did not have the energy to climb for that view. Clouds moved in and the temperature dropped. I dug into the pack for what I had. A little food, a thin jacket, and a half-empty water bottle. The dog still had a spark in him, but I could see the wear in the way he paused between steps. The days blurred. I rationed the food because it felt like the only control I had. I learned the taste of the berries that were safe and the ones that made my stomach churn the next day. Once I found a hollow under a fallen tree and spent a night sheltered from wind. The only thing between me and the cold. There were hours when my limbs ached so badly I could only breathe and tell myself to move. Sometimes I slept on and off, curled against a rock, and woke because of the barking or because the dog shook himself and nudged me. At one point I decided to send the dog out to find help. It was not that I had a clear plan, only that the dog could run faster and maybe meet someone on the trail. I let him go and watched him charge down a descending line of trees until he disappeared. For a long time I told myself he would come back with someone who would help. He did not come back that day. When I moved toward water, I found tracks that had been there before me, fresh and then gone. I followed them where I could, thinking they might lead to people. At the river edge, the footprints stopped like someone had stepped off the path and vanished into brush. That was the kind of small, maddening thing that happens when you are too tired to see patterns clearly. I started to lose the idea of time. Food ran low. My hands cracked. I stopped shouting much because when my voice thinned, there were no answers. Once in the afternoon, I heard people in the distance and hollered until my throat burned. No one came. I kept moving because pausing felt like accepting what was happening. On the 29th day, I was by a rocky bank of a river with my legs trembling and a cold in my bones. I remember sitting down and knowing I could not make it through another night. I called out, once hoarse and small, and then I tried again louder, and my voice came out like a last thrown rope. A group of young trail workers heard it. They were returning to their camp after working on a section of trail, and they answered. They found me lying there, stiff and weak, close to a ford where the water runs fast. For hours, they gave me what little care they could while they radioed for help. I remember the sound of the helicopter when it came and the way the light looked on the metal. Someone wrapped a blanket around me. I got on a stretcher and there was so much noise from people talking that it almost felt unreal. They told my mom later they had found my dog some miles out, alive and thin but okay. And that was the thing I held on to while they flew me out. I woke up days later in a hospital bed with beeping machines and explanations about dehydration and how close I had been. The dog came to visit when I could see people. He sat like he had the right to be there and licked my face until I laughed like an idiot and cried because my mouth was so dry. That's the part I keep repeating when I say it. The slow days that add up, and the last shout that gets answered. There are things I misread, and there are choices I would not make again. There are also small, stubborn pieces of luck. The map I still had folded in my pocket. The fact the crew passed near where I finally sat down. The dog who found people later and led them back with a single bark.